This week we have the pleasure of speaking with Tim Caswell. Tim is one of the founders of Studio Electronics, a company whose gear I've always been a big fan of. They do tremendous work in the digital controlled analog world, which is always a fun area to play with. Particularly their filter designs are something to really highly covet. We are lucky enough to get some of Tim's time this week to talk about the design process, how he chooses what to do, things he chooses to not maybe make so public. But a lot is about his inspiration in making the gear that he makes. I always find that fascinating, as you well know. And so I was really happy to get some insights on Tim's work and some of the future things that Tim's planning on as well. So really exciting interview. I hope you enjoy it. Okay, this week we are going to be speaking to Tim Caswell. Tim Caswell is one of the founders of Studio Electronics, one of the companies that makes fantastical gear. I'll say it that way. It's stuff that over the years has always been inspirational to use, has found its way into being an important part of a lot of different kinds of music. And so I was really excited when Mark Vail actually opened the door to talk to Tim. And so let's say hi to Tim. Hi, Tim. How are you?
I'm pretty good, thanks.
Thanks for taking a little time to talk with us. I really appreciate it. One of the things I do in the podcast is I generally start off by asking people to give us a little information about their background, how they got to the place that they are today. Now, you have quite a long history in the industry, so I think that regardless of what part of your history you decide to tell us about, it'll be pretty interesting. But I'll let you pick. Why don't you tell us something about your background?
Well, there's always music in the house. My dad was a music educator and a very, very accomplished woodwind player. And my mother had a college scholarship on playing the French horn, so there was music all the time in the house. And I know they never forced me to take lessons or anything. I played piano and trumpet stuff, but they were always pretty good about not pressuring me. And then I also like to build things, so kind of end up putting those two together eventually.
Sure. It's interesting that you say that. That they didn't kind of push you into things. I just recently had a discussion with somebody, and we were talking about sort of parental influence and how it seems like if parents make something seem interesting, that's almost inevitably what the kids aren't going to find interesting. You know, did you feel like they were trying to avoid that, or were they just not pushy people?
Yeah. I really don't know why, how that worked out. I mean, they love music. My dad was into classical music and Baroque music, but also he played a lot of big band stuff when he was younger. So we had all that kind of stuff going on. But he was never pushy about it.
Interesting. So, what you said that you kind of started building things. What were some of the first things that you were building?
I think when I was maybe 11, maybe I built a walkie-talkie kit that almost worked. And to the local TV repairman, he said there was a few bad solder joints, but he said, it's pretty close. That kind of got me going. I still have those things.
Oh, do you? Do you keep them in a box, or have you mounted them on the wall?
They're in a bookcase.
Okay, sure, like trophies, right? What's the first time you did musical electronics?
I played guitar starting when, 1963 or 4 maybe it was, I started playing. After I saw the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, of course.
Of course.
Yeah, I got one of the early Maestro fuzz tones, what they used on Rolling Stone Satisfaction. And I opened that up, looking at it, I'm like, geez, this thing's pretty simple. I should be able to make one of these. So I kind of figured out what the parts were and went down to the local place and bought all the parts and tried to build one. And it didn't exactly work. It made a bunch of weird noises. But I don't know. I'm kind of persistent, so I just kept messing with stuff.
So did you like try and figure out the circuit and try and copy it, or did you
Well, I
find
wasn't up to it at that point. I was just trying to, physically put parts in the same sort of place.
Same configuration, right?
So I didn't really know what was going on. I was in bands on the road in the 70s and started getting more into electronics at that point. So we were out on the road, things would break, and you couldn't always get them fixed. So I just started getting books from Radio Shack in the library and building little things on breadboards and just trying to understand this stuff a little better.
Right. Now, at some point, you obviously got pretty good at it because you and Val St. Regis started up a company called Studio Electronics. Now, were you were actually working at SIR or something prior to that, right?
Yeah, that was actually, they kind of were simultaneous.
Oh, okay.
They'd had various different people trying to maintain their equipment there with various success or lack of success. And I saw an ad in one ad paper in LA that someone was looking for a musical instrument repair guy. And I'm like, oh, this is what I always wanted to do. I've been working in Silicon Valley up doing telephone test equipment. Before that, when I lived up by near San Francisco, and that was interesting. I learned a heck of a lot, but I saw an opportunity to work on music here. I'm like, oh, all right. So I went and got that job, and those guys had just contracted with SIR to do their repair. So they sent me over there. There was a big pile of broken stuff in the middle of the shop, and they said, the last guy said, this stuff's all junk. You can salvage anything you want from it. It took me about a week to get it all working. So they kind of looked at each other and said, oh, all right.
Right. That was a good qualifier for the gig, huh?
And those guys proved to be somewhat unreliable, and Val came along about that time, and he knew one of the owners from San Francisco. Val had a music store up there, and he proposed to him that he'll use the unused top story of the building to sell excess gear that they had, and he would partner with me to work the repair shop. So they kind of hired me away from those guys, and Val and I started our business there. So I did their repair, and Val sold stuff, and we had a good time.
Sure. Now, the first thing I remember coming out under the Studio Electronics label was basically a rack-mounted mini Moog. Mm-hmm. And now I'm trying to remember what you guys named it, because I got MIDI Moog in my head, but I think that was a different unit, right?
Well, it was the MIDI Moog originally, and then at that point, someone had bought the Moog name and trademarks and things, and they objected to us using the Moog name, so we had to change it to the Mini MIDI.
Ah, the Mini MIDI. Okay, that makes sense. Now it's coming back. Well, I just remember seeing that, and because that came along at a time where people were so entranced by the samplers and digital systems coming out that they were kind of bailing on analog synths. But at the same time they were doing it, they were also kind of like saying, oh, I just wish, if only that would have integrated into my studio a little better, I probably would have kept it. And the MIDI Moog is I remember being the thing that sort of was like, oh, here's a way to kind of take that cool sounding technology and bring it into the modern studio. With that, did you find that it was well, first of all, like, I remember seeing it and being blown away by it, but it was also pretty expensive for where I was at the time. How many of those did you sell? And did you actually have to like tear apart mini Moogs and rebuild them in order to make it happen?
Originally, yeah. When we first started out, someone would bring us a mini, and we'd take the guts out and stick it in a little rack case. Eventually, we just sort of ran out of minis, and we just started making the boards ourselves.
I see. Okay. So like, how many do you think that you did? Just because occasionally I see them, and I've always wondered, is this like one of 10, or is it like one of 100? I was curious.
Yeah. My partner would know, but Greg St. Regis.
Uh-huh.
I know it's more than 1,000.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
I'm not sure exactly how many. We did really quite a few. They were pretty popular.
Yeah, I'll bet. Apparently so.
back to, just a little more background on that, though, is SAR was really kind of my dream job because they had everything. I mean, I'd built synthesizers myself back in the 70s, and, I didn't really have money to buy stuff, which is why I got into making stuff. I made mix boards and light boards and stuff for my bands, and SIR had everything. They had minis, they had harps, they had Prophet 5s, they had Oberheims. It was just, it was like a candy store for me. I absolutely loved it. And even better, they had all the schematics and service manuals for that stuff. So I was in heaven there for quite a while.
Well, that must have felt like going to the University of Analog Electronics, too, huh?
Oh, absolutely. Analog and digital.
Digital, right.
I learned microcontroller stuff when I was in Silicon Valley at Lear Siegler. They had some early microcontrolled stuff, so I started learning that there. So that was the state of the art at the time, is digitally controlled analog, which is really pretty much still what I do.
Yeah, it is. And I remember when the SE1 came out, it was kind of a stunner because it was, it was clearly analog electronics. I mean, you could hear it the first time you plugged in and played it, but it was all digitally controlled, and you didn't see a lot of that, or at least it didn't seem like you saw a lot of that at the time, and so I thought it was really, it certainly was the start of what I would say is, it was the start of kind of the modern analog re-evolution. I mean, did you feel at the time like you were part of a thing, or were you just doing it because that's what you like doing?
Greg's brother Mark, he's a fantastic musician. He's in touch with a lot of the fairly heavy music makers, and he kind of keeps his ear to the ground, and so we were sort of in touch with what people wanted, actually, and of course, it usually would line up with what we wanted. I generally can't make myself design something if I don't want it. It's much like working a regular job, so I need to want it. But Mark, and we get feedback from different people, and I remember when I was at SIR, I remember the change came about. It was like, I don't know, 83 or 84, maybe,
right?
Exactly, but all of a sudden, mini mugs had kind of not really been rented all that much. All of a sudden, people were renting them for bass, and that became the thing, as everybody was using minis for bass. I think it might have something to do with Stevie Wonder's first solo album, where he used a lot of synth bass.
Right.
But I saw that starting to happen, and really the minis and the SE1s were really used pretty much for bass on R&B dance type music. And it kind of supplanted the regular electric bass, which was kind of unfortunate, because at that time there was the style of slapping and popping, which I love. But synth bass really kind of took over, and we were just lucky enough to get in on that.
Yeah, true enough. Now, I would say that especially with the SE1 and then eventually with the SE1X, that sort of became a standard device in rap music, in kind of hip hop shops. I mean, you would see practically anybody whose studio was detailed out, you would see that they had one of your machines in there, and you would hear it a lot too. I mean, not only as bass tools, but kind of the whiny lead tones and stuff like that. That really became a signature of a lot of rap music, and you guys were right in the center of that, it seemed.
Yeah, Greg would know better than I do who actually used them, but he would, song would come on the radio and he'd go, "Oh, that's patch number 2."
Now that's actually a really interesting. I'm really interested in the answer to a question of something, which is, how much effort and how much concern do you put in the creation of presets? Because I think it's pretty common for most equipment manufacturers and builders to say, when stuff comes back for repair, none of the presets are changed. So there's a sense that the instrument is pretty well defined by the presets. Is that your experience? Do you think?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff there. Our presets mostly are done by Mark, Greg's brother Mark. Greg's done some of them. I really haven't ever done many of the presets on our things, because I'm basically a dinosaur. I still listen to Emerson, Lake and Palmer all the time. So if it was up to me, that's what our presets would be.
You would create the ultimate outdated synthesizer.
Yeah, that's basically the only one SB1 we've ever actually given away was to Keith Emerson.
Oh, really?
Did a little custom software on it too for the glide, so that you could do the solo on Lucky Man.
Oh yeah, oh that's awesome. That's great. So let's talk about, since you're a self-described dinosaur, which is actually that warms my heart. I want to talk a little bit about the studio electronics equipment. So we talked a little bit about the SE1 and 1X, which is obviously that's the things that grew out of your detailed interest in the Mini Moog and kind of following that through the company's history. But there's a couple of other synths that you make that have sort of different voicings. And the one that's probably the easiest for people to approach from a cost standpoint is the Boomstar. Now, the Boomstar device that you sell actually has sort of multiple instances, which are defined by the kind of filtering and voicing that each machine has. And so some of them are more focused on ARP-like timbres. Others are maybe a little more Oberheim-y or Roland-y. What is the process that you go through in terms of creating something that would have that kind of voice? How, if you say, okay, I'm going to do something that has a Roland-ish feel to it, right? How do you go about defining, first of all, for yourself, what does Roland sound like? And secondly, what do you do to determine which of the many possible Roland sounds are the one that you're going to embrace? And then finally, how do you take whatever you find from that research and turn it into something that's your own? So there's your ultimate multi-part question. I'm sorry about that. But I hope you get what I kind of want to learn a little bit more about the process you go through in like designing the hardware to meet some sort of goal.
Really boils down to the filters. It's something we found out kind of early on. A given synthesizer, it's got different quirks and different things it does well, different things it doesn't do so well. And, we were always, on the lookout for the good stuff and, try and get rid of the bad stuff. I came to the conclusion quite a long time ago that the filter is probably the most important part, most characteristic part of the sound. So we figured out the mini filter fairly early on, and that's in the SE1. And then we liked the Oberheim SEMs always too, so the SE1 had that filter on board too. So you could select one or the other, and it gives two really very different sounds.
Right. And
then we were developing the next one, the ATC. Came up with the concept of interchangeable filter cartridges. So there was a slot on the back, and we made the mini cartridge and the SEM cartridge, and then reverse engineered the 2600 filter and the TB303 Roland one, which is really very close to the mini. And so you could buy those as cartridges and change them out real quick on the ATC. And we came up with a selector, an external unit where all four of them could be in there, and you could, part of the program was which one was in a given patch. So that's sort of where that whole thing came from.
Sure, I see. And so the process that you went through then to make these carts, is that basically then that concept and maybe even that circuitry what's used to develop the Boomstars then?
Yeah, we're using the same filters. The Boomstars are all basically the same. It's the same main circuit board, but different resistors get changed just to make each filter work, in its optimum ranges.
Right. So what is it about a circuit or about the part of the development of a synthesizer that you find most interesting? I mean, it sounds like the filter is what you find sort of like gives a thing its voice. Is that where you like also spending your time, or is there something else that you're into? And I ask this because when I talk to other synth builders, some of them are really into like response factors, so like how quickly does an envelope respond, or how much slewing is there in a VCA. And other people are just like, oh, I just want it to sound really warm. It's like their definitions of what drives them from an engineering standpoint can tend to be very, very different. What's the thing that drives you?
I guess it's really just the feeling that you get from playing it. Is it satisfying? Can you get the sounds that you want? Does it feel quick and immediate and satisfying to play? I think is really what I'm most concerned about. And, I want the flexibility to do all the different kinds of things that I think a synthesizer should do, which is, essentially anything that's been done with one in the last 30 or 40 years. It should be able to do everything.
Right.
One of my benchmarks was Edgar Winter's Frankenstein. I always want to make sure that it can do everything that's on that. And, although, it's really not very useful nowadays, a lot of that, but still, it's just sort of a benchmark. And I've always liked the harps. The Boomstar's got a lot of Arp Odyssey influence, as Greg had wanted to play with as we were working on the Boomstar, and I got my old one out, and we were kind of revisiting that and going, oh, this is cool. Hey, can we do this? Oh, yeah, let's throw this in.
Right, sure. That's interesting because while it may be influenced a lot by the Odyssey, the variety of filters certainly gives them different, pretty wildly different sounds.
Yeah, the filters definitely sound different. There's the Yamaha 80 type filter and the mini filter, the ARP filter. They're very different sounding. The SEM, they all sound very different.
What's your favorite?
Oh, that's tough. That's tough. The 80 filter is awful fun. I really like the ARP one too. It's really sharp and cutting. Kind of the resonance on the Moog filter though is really hard to beat.
Right.
Yeah, that's tough. I haven't ever had to make the one, only one choice though.
Right. I guess it is sort of like asking which of your children, which of your children is your favorite, right?
It's pretty hard to do without that mini filter though. That's really like that one quite a lot.
Now, is there any filter that you wanted to duplicate and just didn't feel like you could get it, or?
We've been playing with a Korg 700 filter lately. It was on the mini Korg,
right?
The Maxi Korg. That's essentially it's much like the CS80 filter as far as it being a high pass followed by a low pass. But that one's it's a diode filter, and we really had a hard time getting it to perform the way we would want it to. And I have a mini Korg here, and basically the filter just doesn't have the wide range of control that we expect. They've got it built into the thing in a way that works really well. It doesn't expose its inherent noisiness, and it doesn't expose the fact that it won't track a keyboard or that it's really got a very limited sweep range. They've integrated into that in such a way that it works really well. But if you take that out and then try and put it in one of our other platforms where we're used to filters that are technically much better, it doesn't really look that good.
Well, that's a curious thing, but also one I guess I hadn't thought of, but it makes perfect sense, which is that especially the kinds of filters that you find in sort of all-in-one or in poly-based units or whatever, they can hide an awful lot because it's a pretty opaque system.
Yeah, that one actually really surprised me because I've always liked the mini Korg, and I still do. It's really fun to play. It's a great sounding box, but the filter is just not on the level of what we're used to.
Right.
As far as the range of sweep and tracking and noise and whatnot.
Well, now the other thing with that filter though too is it strikes me that would be that's one that you kind of have to nail, because there was that whole time frame sort of in British pop music where it was just mini Korg preset after mini Korg preset. Every one of those sounds got to be so iconic that you kind of, if you're going to say that that's what you did, it seems like you'd have to nail it pretty well in order to pull it off. That does seem like a tough thing. I hadn't really thought about it, but yeah, it seems
Well,
really
really not so hard to get those sounds. The problem is then when you put that in a boom stereo, I mean, you can dial those in. It's really not that hard to do, but then when you start dialing in other stuff that, wasn't in there, then you start to see the limitations of that filter, and we just feel like we don't really want to put that out there, have a bunch of caveats of, it's just, it'll do this, but it won't do that, and, don't do this, because somebody's going to do that, and they go, wow, this is noisy, this thing doesn't turn
right, sure. Oh, I see what you're saying, right.
So, that one, I've been trying to improve it and fix it, but, then I'm afraid of, well, it's not going to be what it is anymore if I fix it.
Right, good point.
It's really fixable.
That's interesting. That's really wild. Most of the work that you guys have done has been around monosynths, the SE1, kind of building off of the platform concept that the Mini set. The ATC, which was kind of a platform for your filter designs. The Boomstar, which is kind of now the affordable unit that kind of takes on some of these ideas. But you guys built the Omega, which I had the pleasure of trying out once, and it was kind of overwhelming in that it was huge sounding. But I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the Omega and its variants is the only polyphonic thing you guys have done, right?
That's right.
What was, other than, obviously the sheer cost of multiples of every circuit, what was the most difficult development aspect to that?
Oh, certainly writing all the firmware, all the code to run the thing. It's got a main CPU that operates the front panel and receives the MIDI and stores the programs and everything, and then the voice boards each have their own processor that running the actual code that makes the sounds. That was a lot of work. That was a lot of coding. It's not really my favorite thing in the world to do, but we can't really afford to go outside and hire programmers, and I also know from the experiences of other companies that hiring programmers can be very problematical. If you can inherit a lot of bugs, and then if they don't do their job right, you have to go get somebody else who has to try and understand what they did, and you can get layers upon layers of bugs. Certain companies in California that went out of business in the 80s had that problem of too many cooks,
right?
Kitchen, and so I've always just kept it to what I could do myself, so that if it didn't work, at least we know whose fault it was.
Well, in working with microprocessors for this stuff, it strikes me that when a lot of the kind of like earlier designs cropped up, there weren't that many options for microprocessors, and the ones that were out there were not that robust. I mean,
the OB8 is probably the greatest example of what, the absolute limit of what you can really do with one V80. I mean, it's pretty amazing what that does, how many things that poor little processor is actually doing.
Did you ever, or did you occasionally run into situations where for your own work the processor just wasn't up to it?
No, not really. Kind of with the Omega, we decided to, just throw power at the problem, and it just gave each voice its own microcontroller.
Right.
It's really pretty much overkill. One of those could have run all 8 voices, but I didn't want there to be any compromises or any excuses that, would slow the response time or in any way compromise, the immediacy of the playing experience. So, there's 9 microcontrollers in Omega, one for the master and then one in each voice. So they're none of them are working terribly hard, and so the response is very quick.
If I would have had to guess before we had our discussion, I would have guessed that the thing that you found most important in a design would have been the tone, because I always have thought of of the studio electronic synths as really being focused on a specific and very rich tone set, but it actually heartens me to hear you keep on referring to this responsiveness thing, because I have had the opportunity to work with some synthesizer systems that use microprocessors that would sort of fail, that the responsiveness or some of the tasks that micros were supposed to perform weren't quite up to snuff. And especially you see this in cases where, maybe envelopes were supposed to be driven by a digital process, and it just wasn't up for as many envelopes as it was supposed to handle, or some of the voice handling wasn't quite up to snuff. And so if you started hitting the polyphony a lot, you would start to feel things slow down. So I think that it's interesting to think about that from a digital standpoint, but part of that is also the analog circuitry as well. Again, talking about envelopes, it certainly seems like the design of a responsive envelope is really much more art than it is science.
Yeah, a little of both.
Well, just in that, it's not only how quick does it respond, but it's sort of like, I don't know, at least I feel like I sense the difference in the curves of the ramps. I tend to sense the difference of that, kind of almost not intellectually, but almost emotionally. It's almost like I can intuit the difference between, say the curvature of a SH-101's envelope versus an Odyssey's envelope, as an example.
Yeah, that's part of what you feel. That's what I talk about responsive and feel. You feel that.
Right. Now, one of the things that you guys have never done is build a synthesizer that has a keyboard in it. You've always depended on MIDI as a front end, right?
Yeah. There's been various propositions and ideas at times, and we may still do that. That brings in a whole other kettle of fish, and we don't have a lot of room at our various facilities to have big stacks of keyboards and cases and shipping boxes for them.
Yeah.
So I know we had a guy that designed concept cars for Ford that drew us a beautiful rendering of what a polyphonic Omega would look like, and I wanted it. We wanted to make it, and he wanted one.
Right.
And I really wanted to make that, and I don't know, maybe we'll get around to it someday. I mean, I'd really dearly love to have one.
Now, do you ever do like, I would just call them wild ass projects. Do you ever take on like crazy custom projects or just
that we don't really do much of anymore because that's just too time consuming. We're pretty focused on, trying to bring out products that, we think we can sell that also interest us enough to want to design them and then, go ahead and follow through and build them and maintain them without, wishing we'd have never done it.
Well, it goes back to that motivation thing about not even wanting to build anything that you don't really want yourself.
Yeah.
Well, which then begs the next question, which is, what's the next thing that you think you want? What are things that are out there besides like the Korg filter? But what are some of the things out there that intrigue you and represent the kind of thing that would excite you into doing another design?
I'm not sure how much I should talk about what we're working on, but the thing with the Boomstars, that one, and analog purists have kind of always complained about, the pots step and, the envelopes are software and they're not snappy, and which, I really take exception to because I use a digital storage scope to sample the Minimoog envelopes, and, that's got the software code that runs in the SE1 and the Omega is, it's very quick. It updates the envelopes 1,000 times a second, and I really, I challenge anyone to actually measure that they're any slower than a hardware envelope. But with the Boomstar, I said, okay, well, let's just put this to rest. We'll just do one with hardware envelopes. So, and no MIDI, so no stepping of controls. And so, no presets, I should say. It has no
right.
So that's kind of what we did there. But Boomstar is, it's really fairly expensive to make. We can't really sell it for what we really should be able to sell it for. So we're looking at some variant of that that's a little more software intensive and less hardware intensive.
Sure.
That's one of the things we're looking at now, anyway. Doing a lot of audio stuff these days too.
Oh yeah, like what?
Did a couple things with Stephen Slate for Slate Pro Audio a few years ago. The Dragon compressor and the Fox mic pre.
Right.
Those we're still selling those and working on another joint project with them right now.
Oh, that's interesting.
Kind of go between audio and synthesizers, but eventually the synthesizer has to get recorded. So
it's all one big milieu, right?
I kind of started the audio thing because I needed stuff for my studio, and I couldn't afford the stuff that I really wanted. Couldn't afford LA2As and 1176s and that kind of thing. Need boards. So I was thinking, I've got to be able to make those things.
Right. That's wild. Have you guys ever thought about playing around in the up and coming modular world?
Well, funny you ask.
No,
the modules, we should be releasing the first modules next month, I'm thinking.
Oh my goodness.
Circuit boards are out now.
That's exciting.
I think probably, September we should be shipping the first modules. We've been working with Richard Nickel at Pittsburgh Modular.
Right.
And he's going to distribute. We're basically modularizing the Boomstar. What's done first is the filters.
Oh, that's awesome. That is really exciting.
So the filters and then the discrete VCA from the Boomstar, those will be the first modules.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's exciting news because, frankly, there are a lot of good filters, but I don't think, if I were to think of who really understands the Mini Moogs filter best, I can't imagine anyone who understands it better than you do. And so having a fantastic SEM filter come out, that's going to be really, really exciting to hear. I'm glad to hear that. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, that should be interesting. The modular world is really a lot bigger than I realized. I remember when Duffer first came out with that Euro-Rack in the 90s, and I'm like, that's kind of interesting, but to me it's too tedious. I never really got into the modular things. You spend too much time patching stuff before you get to just what, I would expect it to just do when you turn it on.
Right.
But it's a different mindset that I know I don't fully understand, but
well, I can
quality modules.
Yeah, I can tell you why I get into it is because I've been doing music for I hate to even admit this, but like getting on 40 years. And one of the things that I find is that I bothered sometimes by the extent to which I have a tendency to want to use presets, right? So the one thing that a modular system will not do is allow you to fall into preset mode. And so I find that the development of the patch is actually a really important part of what I do. Now, I'm not doing pop or R&B type music, so the big production thing, isn't my deal, and hence I can get away with doing like squeaky little patches and calling it art, right? But I'm just really happy to hear that because I just feel like you guys have some areas of expertise that are really, really particular and kind of groundbreaking, or at the very least industry leading. And so it's good to see that technology come available in different kinds of formats. That's cool. So what do you you have been, you say that you got into guitar as a as kind of one of the great horde of Beatles watch it and pick up the guitar kids, right? So you have basically followed the modern pop and popular music and rock music genres from almost their inception. What is the thing that disappoints you most about where music has gone?
I don't know how much I should talk about that.
Well, if you don't want to, I mean, I guess maybe I'm like saying, which of your customers disappoint you?
I guess, well, yeah. I'm really probably not that up on popular music per se, and turn on the TV, watch the Grammys or something. I'm like, I've never heard of these guys. I'm just really not very aware of it. I mostly listen to older stuff, and the newer stuff I listen to is generally not really very mainstream. What I care about really is groups that actually can play together in real time. And I know, a lot of what I do enables people to piece stuff together, which is great. Allows someone with ideas who doesn't necessarily have a great ensemble on tap to realize their ideas.
Right.
For my musical side, I just find it a lot more satisfying to play with people who play very well.
Right. Well, one of the things that's kind of interesting is that I would say the vast majority of people that use your equipment, or that are, for that matter, going to listen to this podcast, are relatively new to the synth world, and definitely don't have the benefit of the decades of listening that you've done. If you were to take a new generation and try and turn them on to something from the past, what would be the thing that you'd want to turn them on to?
Oh, geez. That's a tough one. That's a tough one. Most of the music genres that I really like, older ones, they really were born, in a place and time. The social conditions at the time, kind of drove the music, and different things coming together that can really never happen that way again. So I think music is probably always, pop music is always an expression of the times and the various threads of popular culture and society coming together. So I don't know if there's really any way to answer that one.
Okay, that's great or interesting advice, and I guess that the other way of saying that is listen to it all. It's all got some value. Well, it sounds like my whole family is coming barreling in the front door. So I'm going to have to wrap this up. But I really appreciate, I know you have a real busy schedule. Since you've spent so much time learning to design stuff, what I'm wondering is if you could give our listeners who might be interested in thinking about trying to design some electronics some advice about where you would tell them to get started.
I wish I would have had the internet back in the 70s when I was starting. It's just, you can find out anything you want now in seconds. I mean, I would look for years for schematics to certain pieces of gear that I was interested in, and maybe finally I'd find it at some studio. And now you can find anything online. There's tutorials, schematics. It's an amazing resource.
Yeah, that's a great point. And especially with like the onset of like the maker environments and stuff like that too, it seems like not only is the information available, but it's kind of getting to be hip to build stuff as well, which is also pretty cool. So, well, Tim, thank you so much for your time, and again for telling us a little bit about the past and about the future. Really excited about this modular thing. I'll tell you that right now. Give a shout out to Mark again for opening the door for us to chat, and have a great day.
Okay, thank you.
Well, how about that? The first Art plus Music plus Technology scoop. We're going to be seeing some modules from Studio Electronics. That's actually really exciting news. Again, I would like to thank all of you listeners for sticking with me. I hope that you've been enjoying it. If you have any questions, comments, ideas for people to interview, please feel free to drop me a line, ddg@cycling74.com. And I will talk to you next week. Bye.